Hello, I'm Jake Stone,
I'm Jesse Owens.
and we welcome you to another episode of Generally Particular, a production of the London Lyceum. Generally Particular is a show dedicated to discussing and reflecting on the whole Baptist story. We are a show by Baptists, about Baptists, and for Baptists, as well as Anglicans, Methodists, Presbyterians, and Lutherans. And today, our spotlight groups, Jesse, are the Brownist and the Diggers. So if any of them are listening, we welcome you to the show. I am a particular Baptist, and Jesse would come from the general Baptist stream. And in the 17th century, those were Calvinists and Arminians. We've brought that together to make this fun show called Generally Particular. Now, Jesse, before we get into today's topic, I spent last week down in North Carolina. I had the honor of speaking at, it was an honor to be there, and being at Brandon Askew's church for a Baptist history conference and to preach on the Sunday. And I thought things went really well. But I've got to share with you that we have some dedicated listeners down there.
Oh, wow.
And I, first of all, we got our trademark slogan from one Ken Patterson, who is a member of the church that Brandon grew up in down there, New Sand Creek Baptist Church. And he said, Generally Particular is deep but light. And he meant that as that we talk about deep things, but we do it in a lighthearted way. Now, that was a really great compliment. I really appreciate that. Then I shared with them about it, and probably anybody that has watched this knows that we sometimes have technical challenges. And I shared that it was Jordan's idea for this to be video. Neither you or I were really elated with that decision. And Ken said that is half the fun of this show, is to watch our faces. He said, you can read me like a book based on how I'm looking. And he then did a great impersonation of you, raising your eyebrows when I say things sometimes.
Oh, man.
And so it was nice to hear the encouragement and also to know how we inspire people to know more about Baptist history.
Yeah, that's encouraging. I'm glad to know someone other than our mothers and maybe some other family are listening. I think Jordan has to listen a little bit before he uploads these videos. So that's at least 4 or 5 people.
Yeah, he's obviously not listening all the way because he still has many deficiencies in his views. So
yeah, I think it was what, 2 or 3 days after the last one posted that he sent a text to both of us and was critical of our food recommendations.
Yeah, especially, because some of us are the part of the working class people, and we can't afford those highfalutin things like others. Yeah. I did enjoy my trip. I got my first experience of cookout down in Nashville. And of course, going down and coming back, I stopped at Buc-ee's and got me a brisket sandwich and paid for gas under $3 for the first time, and who knows when. And let's see, I also had my stop at Bojangles too. I love that Cajun filet chicken biscuit.
Did you do the Bowberry? Did you do the Bowberry?
No, I didn't do the sweet stuff. I had to get, because here's the thing, I get sweet tea to drink. Yeah. So if I'm going to, I can't have something sweet. Then that I got to have salty with the sweet. So yeah, that's how I am. What's happening your way that's interesting?
I don't know. Just finished up a day of classes here at Welch College. So yeah, that's about it for me today.
That's it.
That's Nothing why I'm in the uniform.
You haven't ate anything, drank anything interesting?
Let's see. Nothing of note. Well, I did go to Edley's Barbecue on Saturday.
Ooh. Hey, that's the place that's got the burn-in and grits.
That's excellent. Right. And I had the brisket burn-ins on the grits casserole.
Yes.
And it was really good. Really good. And
well, we
also
had
some great coffee, I know we share that love. Great coffee.
Yeah. More power to you. So we also want to take a moment today as part of something that we want to incorporate, and that is talk about an old hymn. So I've got my Heavenly Highway hymns. There's probably people that are listening and watching who have never seen this in their lives.
No.
You're missing out.
Yeah.
And the hymn I said something to Jesse about, I've changed my mind now. So one that we used to sing a lot of was "Hide Thou Me." I always, if sometimes I feel discouraged and think my life in vain. I'm tempted to murmur and of my lot complain. But when I think of Jesus and all he's done for me, then I cry, "O Rock of Ages, hide thou me."
It's
You
good.
want to sing the chorus for us now, Jesse?
I don't. I'm not much of a singer, but if you want to lead us, of course,
No.
you and I have both been a part of small churches, and it don't matter if you're a good singer or not. If you're the pastor, you might be leading the singing.
Yeah, people used to say they followed me. That's scary. And then right next to it is I heard one Baptist preacher when I was growing up say that this was the theme song of many Baptist deacons. I've never been sorry. I've never been sorry, praise the Lord, that I trusted his blessed holy name. Every moment I find him, all the way, he's exactly the same. So I've never been sorry. But in that context, it was the deacons, they'd never done anything wrong. So, on that note, today's episode is Get Over It. Do Baptists have a martyr complex? Now, we're kind of living in some very interesting times to me in the broader Protestant world as we seek to understand how shall we then live, to quote Francis Schaeffer, how shall we live in these days, navigating political and cultural turbulence? And it is, let us say, spurred on interesting views and insights on political theology. Some of those recently, and like in the last week, but it's been going on longer than that, is this notion and critique of the Baptist movement that we focus too much and make too much of our past and those who were jailed and in any way suffered because they were Baptist. And we're still talking about 400 years later, all of these things, and it builds within us this martyrs complex. I think all of this stuff is kind of hogwash, if I'm to be very blunt this afternoon, especially when it's some of the same group that is calling for some type of Protestant strongman like the Spanish Franco from the 1930s, who was a fascist and, was cordial with Mussolini and Hitler. I'm still actually a lowercase Republican. I have no desire for a Caesar or a strongman, but we'll leave that to the side for now. And
No,
just
do
focus.
tell us more.
Well, I actually still prefer a Ronald Reagan and a Margaret Thatcher
Okay.
to a dictator, even if he were quote unquote a Baptist or a Protestant. We could do a whole episode on why are people drawn to strong men, not just in the nation but in churches. Hence, somebody like Mark Driscoll, for example, who still has a cult following.
They didn't listen to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill.
Did I?
No, I said they didn't. His cult following.
A lot of people think that was a bad show. I mean, I think there's some shots taken against conservative theology in places, but I think overall it's very instructive.
Yeah.
So anyway, not to get on that rabbit trail, but Jesse, is there a point? Do we have a martyr complex as Baptists? Is everybody going around in Baptist churches thinking they're Obadiah Holmes in their community?
Well, let me begin by saying that some of those who would critique people like us for having a martyr complex would be people who were defending religious liberty and a Baptist view of religious liberty 4 years ago. I forget who pointed that out, but I think that's a pretty accurate assessment. Is some of the people who would say, get over it or stop harping on Baptists and Baptists being persecuted were the same ones who were talking about Baptist views of religious liberty and writing for websites and posting blogs,
Wow, Jesse must have had a little Tabasco in that coffee.
No fewer than 5 years ago. And then they turn around and, from the vantage point of, Moscow, Idaho, to tell us that
Moscow.
Sorry, Moscow. You do want to.
I have been corrected on that. It's Moscow, Russia.
You want to make sure you distinguish the one in Russia and the one in Idaho. So I could see why you went there.
They're both. Well, I won't go there. Go ahead.
They're spelled the same way, right?
They're spelled the same way.
Well, okay.
Yeah, both have some have, and people live in both that have affinity for strong men leadership.
Yeah. But some of those same people would be the ones who would say this. So, as we were thinking about this, do Baptists have a martyr complex? I would say, why don't we begin by thinking about the average person in the pew in a church, or quite frankly, even some average pastors, maybe who aren't as aware of Baptist history, Baptist political theology, and things like that. I think for the average person in the pew, they have little to no awareness of Baptist persecution in England or in America. They may not know anything about Baptists in England in the 17th century. So they're not walking around as people in a Baptist church thinking that they're a part of this people that experienced persecution, 400 years ago. So they're not thinking about that. In fact, when I talk to people about Baptist political theology in sort of local denominational settings, things like that, average pastors and average church members don't even have any idea that Baptists have been persecuted at all in America. So I think that that's something that they would be completely unaware of. So I don't think the average person is walking around with a martyr complex. The average Baptist is doing that. There's some other things I want to say, but maybe you can pitch in on that.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's very fascinating to hear these critiques about historical, verifiable events that really took place. It was real persecution because of what they believed. And I have two things that I want to say. Number one is that it's fascinating that Baptists would get rebuked on this by people who, in the current moment, all the time are talking about how persecuted they are in their context.
Ruh-roh.
Number two, in this time when people are filled with bravado and bragging about how strong they are in their views, I would love to know how many of them would be willing to suffer, really, as these men and women did who suffered because of what they believed. I'd much rather would learn from people who actually knew real persecution and held fast and firm to the faith than those who are typing all these things in the confines of an air-conditioned or heated or whatever nice place where they can spout off their views.
Well, they get some
view.
They get some mean replies to their tweets.
Yeah, I think actually being locked in a prison in London and pretty much left there for years is a lot worse. So,
but mean tweets.
No, Jesse's trying to trigger me on something else, and I'm not going to go there. So,
no, it's just sort of ironic.
Yeah, it is, but I think we want so much. I think sometimes it's because these people shame us in a way of how easy we are. All of us, we like to be comfortable. We want to be in our comfort zone. And we don't really want to rock the boat in a meaningful way. Posting something on social media is not really rocking the boat that much. We may think it is in our little echo chamber, but it isn't. And I think understanding, when I think about, for example, the group that Thomas Helwys leads back to England, these people knew what awaited them. They were under no delusions, and yet because of their steadfast commitment, their holding of truth, they went anyway.
Yeah. I mean, Helwys basically, they flee persecution in England and go over to Holland, and they come back in 1612 to London, and that's basically the reason is they felt as if this was a necessity. They felt guilty about their fellow believers, fellow Baptists, suffering for the faith, and they had fled persecution, and so they wanted to go back and be there with these people, and they plant a church, there in Spitalfields, and it doesn't take very long at all after they're back for Helwys to end up in Newgate prison, and where he seemingly eventually dies. And so, yeah, so they go back with a conscientious awareness of these things. So what you're pointing out is the actual bravery of people who faced persecution for the faith. And we do talk about this a lot. You and I, talk about this a lot. But I would say in some ways we've kind of been forced to talk about it. I don't know that we're trying to talk about Baptist views on religious liberty and religious toleration. It really is with kind of the rise of this big push over the last 4 to 5 years, and sort of the spread of these pushes for a sort of magisterial form of Protestantism, and having a Christian prince, or all of the various ways that these things are pushed, that we've had to kind of respond to these other views. So it's not as if we were wanting to go around talking about Baptist persecution and Baptist views on religious liberty or religious toleration. It's kind of come about as a necessity in response to the proliferation of various calls for a magisterial form of Protestantism.
Well, and it's also because there are people who are, in my opinion, and I think you share this, that are belittling what those individuals went through. And I mean, there's almost this notion that Obadiah Holmes had it coming for him and he deserved it.
Well, he was, he was warned, don't preach the Bible, here, so.
Well, the thing is, I don't need permission for that. This is what it gets to. We don't need the state to give us permission to go preach.
Yeah.
Obadiah Holmes was a pastor who was going to visit a member of his flock. And we, as the people of God, don't have to go check with the magistrate whether we can go visit the flock or not, or go preach the word or not.
Yeah.
And so people want to say, well, if he'd have just paid, and that's not really a religious matter. Yeah, it is a religious matter.
But those are the same people. Those are the same people who would say, you're not going to tell me what to do within the life of the church as it comes to like mandates regarding COVID-19 and all of this other stuff. It's like, we're going to do whatever we want. But then those same people turn around and they're like, well, Obadiah Holmes, he was warned, man. So he kind of had it coming, So if the government
the thing is too, of course, I've pointed this out before and got pushback that the private public distinctions didn't exist. Well, they do now, in part, thankfully, because of Baptist. But they were in that man's home. They were in the member's home. And the thing is that I find it fascinating that on one hand, we want to be the tough macho men in our day. And then people who actually were tough, who actually were brave, that somehow we're going to belittle. Now, I'm not saying that means that, we go around and, we're supposed to make everybody feel guilty that's not a Baptist because they may have, persecuted us 400 years ago. I'm not looking for reparations from the Congregationalists and the Church of England, although if they want to send us money, we'll always take it. Especially here in this podcast. Somebody asked me, by the way, did we make any money off of doing this show? We hadn't seen any checks yet. So we're not doing it because we're getting rich off of it. And it is a labor of love. But the thing is that I think we need more of this time. And these men they weren't going out there beating their chest and saying, look at me. They were faithful in what they were doing. I taught last week on Benjamin Keach, and I mean, there he is in the pillory. They're burning his book underneath his nose, so he has to smell in the smoke, and people are throwing stuff at him. That could not have been a very pleasant experience. And what's he doing? Well, he gets out there and starts preaching to the people.
Yeah.
Calls them to repentance.
Yeah. So again,
by the way, for everybody listening, that's the time in Benjamin Keach's life that Jesse likes, because that was when he was still a General Baptist. So Jesse is pro Keach to 1672.
Yeah. Well,
when he married his second wife, who most think is his converting factor to the particular Baptist.
So, sometimes it works that way, right? Yeah. No, I still love Keach even into the 1690s. That's another episode though. I want to know if the people who think that Baptists have a martyr complex would say that Christians in general have a martyr complex. So the folks who are saying, y'all need to get over it, stop talking about Thomas Helwys, and stop talking about Benjamin Keach, and stop talking about Obadiah Holmes, and stop talking about John Leland and Isaac Backus and others. Just stop talking about it. Will those same people tell us to stop talking about early Christian martyrs in the first century? Will they tell us to stop talking about Christian martyrs in the second century? Will they tell us to stop talking about those who fled persecution in England and came to the American colonies? So, we talk about in Christianity, we talk about persecution a lot. We find it throughout the Bible. We find it in the post-apostolic era. So I don't know that talking about persecution among Baptists, especially again when it's kind of something that we've been forced to talk about a bit more within the last few years, is any different than the way that we talk about the persecution of the apostles and Christians in the post-apostolic period, or the persecution of Christians in England who fled to the colonies. I just don't see that as being drastically different. We talk about these things in general. It just happens to be a part of our tradition. And as we're forced to talk about Baptist views on religious liberty and religious toleration, it's inevitably a part of the conversation.
Yeah, and it's instructive because they are suffering these things not in a Muslim state, not in a Hindu state. All these places would have been called Christian nations or Christian states. And it goes back to that line that I love from Backus when he said it's not about the pence, but the power. It's not about how much money it is, but it is about the state saying we have the authority and power to do these things. And that's what's instructive, is these individuals lived through what people are glorifying and acting like is what we need to get to, as if somehow, and let's just put the cards on the table, folks. If we had a Christian nationalist nation here, if America was that, it would be TBN. It would be Paula White and Kenneth Copeland and that crew running. It's not going to be, Massachusetts and the Puritans from the 17th century. So, that's what I think gets lost in all of this, is the segment that's trying to come up with some recovery of 17th century puritanical Massachusetts and say that's, what we're getting for here and going after. Well, even if their desires happen that somehow, overnight, the United States is quote unquote a Christian nation, it ain't going to be a Puritan nation.
No, Jake,
it's not going to be the city on the shining city on the hill that the Puritans called Massachusetts.
No, it's going to be mere Christendom. They're going to be nice to all Christians of all stripes. They promise. They promise they'll be nice.
Sure.
They will be nice.
Well, Charles II promised that toleration would be continued when he came to the throne. How'd that work out?
Not
3
so
years?
well. Not very well.
No. They were all, the Great Ejection happened. Bunyan was put in prison. And I want people, and I want you, Jesse, to show the book that you recently got. And people need to hear these names. They need to hear about, John Bunyan, but Abraham Cheer, who spends, I think it's 5 years in prison in the 1660s, a Baptist pastor. It's Hercules Collins. It's Helwys. It's Merton. It's those men at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Even like you're saying,
all these leaders, William Kiffin goes to prison several times. It's because he has money that he can get out. He has a reputation that they have to show him respect, but it's not because all of a sudden they found a new desire for religious harmony. It's because he had means.
Yeah, it's because William Kiffin's able to come up with thousands of pounds to loan to the government. That's what got General Baptist out of prison in Aylesbury. So thank you for our William Kiffin. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is they really didn't have a William Kiffin in New England. No. They didn't have that kind of a guy that could just pay. And as we've said, it's both sides, and it's not just Obadiah Holmes in the 1650s. It's 100 years later. So in the days of men like Isaac Backus, it is still. I mean, people would have Baptists were saying, we don't believe in the state paying the minister of a church that we're not the member of. That's not how this works. That congregation or that denomination should take care of that, but not the state. And then you go down to Virginia, and we're talking about in the 1760s and 1770s. So we're here on the eve of the Revolutionary War, and Baptists in Virginia had it bad. I mean, just listen to this one story. There's a man, Samuel Harris. This is from Barry Hankins and Thomas Kidd's book, Baptist in America. Samuel Harris, one of the early converts of Daniel Marshall of Sandy Creek, North Carolina, became known as the Virginia Apostle because of his heart-piercing preaching. But his meetings attracted unwanted attention too. In one instance in Orange County, a man dragged Harris from the pulpit and hauled him about, sometimes by the hand, sometimes by the leg, and sometimes by the hair of his head, an early Baptist historian recalled. Harris's supporters clashed with his attackers, and friends brought Harris to a nearby house where he took refuge in a hidden attic. You also have there James Ireland, who's arrested for quote-unquote illegal preaching. And so I don't know. This is religious persecution. You can try to parse this with legal language all you want.
But the point is, Jake, it would never.
Let's get to let's bring it back.
It would never happen again. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Again, it would be different this time. It's happened all the other times.
That's what people who that's the old line. We've never really had true socialism. Right. It's never been tried.
We've never had true Christian nationalism. So or mere Christendom. So we got to try it out, see how it works. We've never had it before. But that's the martyr complex talking. It's the martyr complex talking. By the way, the whole thing, are we just supposed to be totally ignorant of the past? No, I don't. Like you said, I don't go around demanding that Presbyterians, pay for the repairs to Baptist church buildings because of what happened to us in the past. But it's like, are we supposed to just pretend like the project hasn't gone well for Baptist in the past? Maybe that's what we're supposed to do, is just pretend to be naive about the whole thing.
No, I think what this serves for us to do is because we are in a period of great fear. I mean, we're recording this right now, just a few days after the horrible events of terrorism in Israel by Hamas, and it's not an understatement to say that it feels like it could be a powder keg in the Middle East soon. And so there's a lot of fear, but we can't allow the times or the cultural moment to change what we believe and that application to it. Now, I'm not going to try to say here that, there's been some who said, well, are you going to compare Obadiah Holmes getting whipped to the Marian martyrs? All right. Yes, it's true. Obadiah Holmes didn't die. But I promise I don't know anybody that's sane that's going to go sign up to go get whipped 30 times that's not a good experience. He had scars for the rest of his life. And so I think that however one has suffered for the kingdom should cause us to remember that there is a cost in following Christ. Mm. And we can talk all day long we want to about being convictional or having convictional leadership, but you find out if it really is, if it costs you something. And it cost these men a lot. I don't know what it would be like to, and the prisons over there in London in the 17th century were not nice places. It's not like you were getting locked up and left somewhere for 5 years in comfort. Yeah. And I think that we would do well to, I'm not saying these people were perfect and got everything right, but I think before we start condemning, I think it would be well for us to commend and to honor and be thankful for anyone who has stood for truth in the face of great hostility. We're still talking about Here I Stand from Martin Luther after all these years. Why is that? Because it was costly. He was at a moment where it was literally could cost him his life.
Maybe we can stop talking about, maybe we'll just stop talking about Wycliffe and Tyndale and Huss while we're at it too. Maybe we can just stop that.
Yeah, I just yeah, I think what it boils down to is I sometimes think it's because the Baptist view and the Baptist writings and the Baptist theology is going at the heart of a lot of things that people are now wanting to promote. And I just say it because it sells well.
Mm,
If you have people who are filled, who are, you know, very concerned and fearful, and you're looking for what might be some kind of solution, well, you know, just having the Christian Prince, that sounds wonderful, but it's not built in
yeah.
reality at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's total, like you were saying earlier, it's reactionary. So, do we always need to deal with the context that we're living in? Sure, like we can't ignore the context that we're in. We can't bury our head in the sand. So we're not advocating that. We're not saying we're after some sort of repristination or we're going to recreate 17th century Baptist in England. But we are saying that there are core principles in Baptist political theology that are applicable to us in the 21st century in America, and we don't change those just because of the rise of some other concern. Again, we take those things into account. We need to deal with what's in front of us in the same way in pastoring. You know, just because I'm preaching through a book of the Bible doesn't mean I just give up on what's going on in the world. I have to address the context I'm in, but that doesn't change my core principles. And the same is true for Baptist political theology. I'm not going to alter those things just because the West has become, you know, increasingly more secularized, because I didn't believe them in the first place, just as a sort of pragmatic matter. I thought they were consistent. I think they're consistent with the teachings of Jesus and the apostles on the relationship between the church and political authority and power and the kingdom of Christ and how it operates in the world.
Yeah, and I think if people also want to see what do you do if the government will not listen to you, you know, Backus and those Baptist ministers in the Warren Association actually engaged in acts of civil disobedience. It wasn't violent, it wasn't armed rebellion, but it was them saying, by our conscience, we believe this is wrong and error, and we're not going to obey it. And I think that gives us a principle and a pattern for us to follow. And it's not that I don't want to be put up in the pillory. I'm not hankering for that. But I think that we do need to understand that if we are going to stand for truth, it is going to be costly. And I think that all the people you just mentioned a moment ago, you know, John Wycliffe, John Huss, and so many others, part of why we do what we do is because of what they've passed on to us. And I think that for us as Baptists, we're able to go back to writings and say, before we get all kind of consumed with this notion that we're going to somehow make America Christian, and for some people again, and, you know, get, you know, this notion of this Protestant Franco and all this other, you know, stuff. We need to listen to the voices that lived through regimes, since that's another favorite word of some folk, the regimes that were, you know, Christian, that put them in jail, that fined them, that
Yeah.
whipped them. And let's be honest, I mean, these people, like, you know, in Obadiah Holmes' case, they're all Calvinist, they're all covenant theologians, they're all, you know, pretty much the same thing. You know, people will minimize, say, well, it's only like 2% of difference. Well, the 2% ended up costing a lot for them. So I just think that we should be honoring and learning instead
Yeah.
of belittling.
Well, I think what we're advocating for is a historical awareness. You know, the problem with being pragmatic and the problem with being reactionary is that if you're not careful, you're so nearsighted. You don't take into account all of the wisdom that we can learn from history and from Christian history, from church history, and in our case, that we can learn from Baptist history. So again, we're not trying to be ignorant of the present, but we are trying to say, as we're thinking about and assessing the present, taking into account the wisdom of the ages, taking into account the wisdom of church history, taking into account the wisdom of Baptist history, and then asking, what does that mean in the present age? And again, not being so captive to the present age. And for those who seem to be resisting that the strongest, I think are so caught up in the moment, or so nearsighted about the current situation.
All right. Well, anything else you want to add to today to spice things up?
No, I mean, there's some other names we might have liked to have mentioned to make things slightly spicier, but maybe we'll just save that for another time.
Restraint.
I do want to say something in another episode, so this will be upcoming, about people who criticize churches and pastors and their response to a lot of the things we see politically and culturally and socially, who have a very narrow experience of the church and of pastors, and are only familiar with mega churches and more seeker sensitive churches, and just don't know much about little small average churches. But we'll save that for another time.
The whole nother world. Whole nother world. All right. Well, friends, we hope this will be stimulating and encouraging. And as we always say, stay Baptist.